She found a puppy freezing. Little did she know what it would become. Sarah Mitchell felt her heart breaking as she watched the small creature shivering behind the dumpster of her veterinary clinic. The harsh winter hitting the town of Aspen had been especially cruel to abandoned animals, but she had never seen a puppy in such a pitiful state. What intrigued her most wasn't just the cold making the animal tremble, but those golden eyes that seemed filled with an impossible wisdom for something so small. Sarah knew she should report the finding to the local authorities, as per the clinic's protocol, but something in that gaze made her hesitate. "Come here, little one. I won't hurt you," she whispered, slowly extending her hand. The puppy watched her for a few seconds before cautiously approaching. When Sarah finally managed to pick it up, she felt how its thin body shook, not just from cold, but from fear. Small wounds marked its paws, and its dark fur was dirty and tangled. "You're all alone in the world too, huh?" she murmured, feeling an instant connection with the animal. Sarah didn't usually bring work home. At 28, she had built a solid reputation as a veterinarian in Aspen, always maintaining the necessary professional distance. But this time was different. Something about that puppy touched her in a way she couldn't explain. Inside her simple home on the outskirts of town, Sarah improvised a cozy corner for the animal. She offered puppy food, but it only sniffed and backed away. She tried warm milk, which was also rejected. It was only when, on impulse, she offered a small piece of raw meat left over from lunch that the puppy showed real interest. How strange, she thought aloud, watching as it devoured the meat with a hunger that went beyond normal physiology. In the first few days, Sarah kept the animal hidden even from Mrs. Dorothy, her curious neighbor who always knew everything happening on the street. There was something that made her want to protect that small being with golden eyes from any outside interference. What started to worry her were the rapid changes in the puppy. In just 1 week, it had grown surprisingly. Its ears, once round and droopy, began to become more pointed. Its snout also seemed to be lengthening, giving the animal a less domestic appearance. Sarah tried to rationalize. Maybe it was just a breed she wasn't familiar with, or a mutt with peculiar characteristics. But the more time she spent observing the animal, the more restless she became. Her professional instincts began to sound alarms she tried to ignore. "You really are different, aren't you?" she said one morning, stroking the fur that now showed wild tones that definitely didn't belong to any domestic breed she knew. The first major concern came when Sarah noticed that the animal only slept deeply during the day, becoming restless and alert at night. Several times she woke up to strange noises coming from the living room, finding furniture slightly moved and the animal standing near the window, as if watching something outside. She decided to schedule an appointment with Dr. Vincent, an experienced veterinarian who had been her mentor during college in New York. If anyone could identify the breed or at least reassure her about the animal's behavior, it would be him. "Sarah, are you sure you found this animal abandoned?" asked Dr. Vincent after thoroughly examining the puppy, which was now almost 2 months old and already showing considerable size. "Yes, why?" she replied, noticing the worried expression on the older veterinarian's face. "I need to be direct with you. This animal is not a common dog. I'm going to request some tests, but everything indicates we're dealing with a hybrid." The word hybrid echoed in Sarah's mind like an alarm bell. She knew enough about American legislation to understand the legal implications of what Dr. Vincent was suggesting. Wolf hybrids were strictly prohibited as companion animals in the country. "A hybrid of what exactly?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Of a wolf, Sarah. This animal has unmistakable characteristics of Canis lupus. The tests will confirm it, but I'd bet my career on it. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The way back home was the longest of Sarah's life. She held the carrier box knowing that inside it was an animal that, officially, should not be in her possession. The test results would arrive in a few days, but she already knew in her heart that Dr. Vincent was right. At home, she observed the animal with completely different eyes. Every movement now made sense. Every strange behavior found an explanation. The way it constantly sniffed the air, how its ears moved capturing sounds imperceptible to her, how its golden eyes shone with an almost human intelligence. "What am I going to do with you?" she whispered, sitting on the floor next to the animal she now knew was part wolf. As if understanding her dilemma, the animal approached and rested its head on her lap. In that moment, Sarah felt a protective love that transcended any logic or law. It didn't matter what the tests said, it didn't matter the legal consequences. That being had come into her life for a reason, and she wasn't going to abandon it. The decision to keep the secret lasted exactly 3 days. It was when Jennifer, the receptionist at Dr. Vincent's office, casually mentioned the interesting case of the hybrid while in line at the bank. The news spread through the small town with the typical speed of gossip in places where everyone knows each other. Sarah's phone started ringing the next morning. First it was Brandon, her lawyer brother, calling from New York in a panic. Then it was her mother, Mrs. Patricia, crying and asking if she had completely lost her mind. Last, the call she feared, from the state environmental authorities. "Dr. Sarah Mitchell, this is Agent Henderson from the Environmental Protection Agency. We need to schedule a visit to assess the situation of the hybrid animal under your care," said the formal voice on the other end of the line. "May I ask when would be convenient?" Sarah tried to keep her voice steady, though her hands were shaking. "Tomorrow at 9 in the morning we will be there. Bring all the animal's documentation and prepare for the necessary legal procedures." When she hung up the phone, Sarah let herself fall into the kitchen chair. She looked at the animal, now clearly a young wolf hybrid, watching her from its favorite spot near the window. It seemed to sense her distress, approaching and touching its cold nose to her hand. "They're going to take you, aren't they?" she said, feeling tears burn her eyes. That night Sarah couldn't sleep. She stayed up researching online about wolf hybrids, animal rights, and any legal loophole that could protect her companion. The more she read, the more hopeless she felt. The legislation was clear and inflexible. Wolf hybrids should be handed over to appropriate zoos or sanctuaries. The visit from the environmental agents happened as scheduled, but Sarah wasn't prepared for the bureaucratic reality of the situation. 2 uniformed men examined the animal, took photos, measured and weighed it, treating it like evidence in a legal case. "Doctor, the animal will be removed today." "We have a court order and a confirmed spot at the New York Zoo," Agent Henderson informed her, handing over a stack of papers. "No." Sarah stepped between the agents and the hybrid, who had hidden behind her, sensing the tension in the air. "He's not just any animal, he has a connection with me." "He was abandoned, I saved him, took care of him." "Ma'am, we understand your dedication, but the law is clear. Besides, wolf hybrids can pose a risk to public safety. The animal needs to go to a suitable environment." "What risk?" "He's never hurt anyone. Look at him." Sarah pointed to the hybrid, who was visibly frightened by the stranger's presence. Agent Henderson sighed, displaying a patience that seemed rehearsed for situations like this. "Doctor, we know this case is emotionally difficult, but we have a 15-day deadline for voluntary resolution before stricter measures are taken. Use this time to properly say goodbye to the animal." After the agents left, Sarah felt completely lost. 15 days. 2 weeks to find a solution or forever lose the being that had become the center of her life. She looked at the hybrid, who had returned to his spot near the window, but now kept his eyes fixed on her as if awaiting an answer. "We'll figure it out, boy." "Somehow we'll figure it out," she promised, though she didn't know how to keep that promise. The following days were an emotional roller coaster. Sarah tried to work normally at the clinic, but her concentration was completely compromised. Clients noticed her distraction, and some even cancelled appointments after learning about the hybrid. The news had spread not just through the town, but throughout the entire region. It was during one of these difficult mornings that the first truly serious incident occurred. Sarah had left early for the clinic, leaving the hybrid alone as she always did. When she returned for lunch, she found Mrs. Dorothy waiting anxiously on her porch. "Sarah, dear, I need to tell you something serious," the neighbor said, visibly shaken. "What is it, Mrs. Dorothy?" "Your animal broke into my yard this morning, killed 3 of my youngest chickens. It wasn't just for food, you know. It was like it was an instinct. It was a wild one." Sarah felt her world collapse. She rushed inside and found the hybrid sleeping peacefully in his usual spot, but there were small feathers stuck to his snout. The evidence was undeniable. "Why did you do this?" she asked, knowing he couldn't answer but needing to voice her frustration. The hybrid just looked at her with those golden eyes that now seemed filled with a wildness she had tried to ignore. For the first time since she found him, Sarah felt fear. Not of him directly, but of what he was becoming. She immediately went to Mrs. Dorothy's house to take responsibility for what happened. She offered financial compensation for the chickens, but realized the damage went beyond material loss. The news of the attack would spread, and her position would become even more complicated. "Dorothy, I'll fix this. I'll pay for the chickens and make sure it doesn't happen again," she said, trying to maintain her dignity, even though she knew she was losing credibility with every word. "Sarah, you're a good girl, you always have been. But this animal is dangerous. What if next time it's not just a chicken? What if it's a child?" The genuine concern in the neighbor's voice was evident. The question echoed in Sarah's mind all afternoon. What if it really was a child next time? She had grown so emotionally attached to the hybrid that she had ignored the real risks he posed. For the first time, she began to question whether keeping the animal was truly the best decision for everyone involved. That night she observed the hybrid with more critical eyes. She noticed how it moved through the house with an agility and strength that were no longer those of a domestic animal, how its predatory instincts manifested even during play, how it seemed constantly alert to threats she couldn't perceive. The second incident happened just 3 days later. Sarah was taking the hybrid for an evening walk when they encountered 2 children playing in the square near her home. The hybrid, usually calm on the leash, suddenly stiffened and emitted a low growl that Sarah had never heard before. "Mommy!" shouted one of the children, running toward a woman who was chatting with other mothers on a nearby bench. The mother's reaction was immediate and understandable. Several women stood up, grabbed their children, and began shouting for Sarah to keep the animal away. The hybrid didn't show direct aggression, but its posture was unmistakably intimidating. "I'm sorry, he won't hurt anyone," Sarah tried to explain, pulling the hybrid by the leash, but her own voice trembled with nervousness. "That's the wolf everyone's talking about," shouted one of the mothers. "How can you walk that thing near children?" Sarah left the square as quickly as possible, feeling the weight of accusing stares. On the way back home, she noticed the hybrid maintained a different posture, more upright, more wild. It was as if the presence of other people had awakened instincts it normally kept dormant when they were alone. At home, she sat on the floor and looked directly into the hybrid's golden eyes. For the first time, she saw in them not just the abandoned pup she had rescued, but a wild predator growing up in an environment it wasn't born for. "You miss your real family, don't you?" she asked, slowly extending her hand to touch its head. "You miss running free, hunting, living as your instincts command?" The hybrid approached and rested its head in her hand, but Sarah could feel the tension in its muscles. It was as if it were constantly forcing itself to be something it wasn't naturally. The next day, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was from Brandon, her lawyer brother, but this time the conversation was different from their previous discussions about legality and risks. "Sarah, I've done a lot of research on your case. There's a possibility you need to consider," said Brandon, and something in his tone indicated this wouldn't be another attempt to convince her to surrender the animal. "What possibility?" "There's a wildlife biologist named Daniel Peterson who works with cases like yours. He doesn't advocate for forced domestication or confinement in conventional zoos. He has a different approach." Sarah felt a spark of hope. "What kind of approach?" "He works with the concept of assisted semi-freedom, creating environments where hybrids can express their natural instincts but still receive human care when needed. It's neither domestication nor complete abandonment." For the first time in days, Sarah felt there was a light at the end of the tunnel. The idea of a third option, something between completely losing the hybrid or keeping it prisoner to its own instincts, seemed almost too good to be true. "Where does this biologist work? How can I contact him?" "He has a project in the Blue Ridge Mountains region, not far from Aspen. I can try to schedule a conversation if you want." "Please, Brandon, anything is better than just waiting for the deadline without doing anything." After hanging up, Sarah felt energized for the first time in weeks. There was a real possibility of finding a solution that would benefit both her and the hybrid. It wouldn't be a complete victory, but perhaps it was the best possible solution to an impossible situation. The meeting with Daniel Peterson was scheduled for 3 days later at his property in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Sarah made the 2-hour trip with the hybrid, noticing how he became more alert and interested as they moved away from the city and entered a wilder area. Daniel's property was impressive. It wasn't a traditional zoo, but rather a series of large enclosures that simulated natural habitats. Sarah could hear sounds of wolves in the distance, and the hybrid immediately went into a state of high alert. "So this is the famous hybrid from Aspen," said Daniel, a man of about 50, bearded and with kind eyes that immediately inspired trust. "Yes, he has been quite an experience," replied Sarah, watching as the hybrid examined every detail of the new environment. "I can imagine. May I examine him?" For the next 20 minutes, Daniel examined the hybrid with an expertise that surpassed anything Sarah had ever witnessed. It wasn't just a veterinary exam, but a deep behavioral assessment. "Sarah, I need to be honest with you. This animal is suffering," Daniel finally said. "Suffering? But I take very good care of him. He has food, shelter, affection." "It's not that kind of suffering. It's psychological suffering. Look at him now, listening to the wolves in the distance. See how his whole body is tense? He knows there are others of his kind nearby, and his instincts are screaming for him to join the group." Sarah looked at the hybrid and realized Daniel was right. The animal's entire behavior had changed since they arrived there. It was as if he was finally home. "But he loves me, I'm sure of that," she said, feeling tears forming. "And he truly loves you. That's obvious. But love isn't possession, Sarah. Sometimes love is knowing when to let go." Daniel's words echoed in Sarah's mind as he explained his assisted semi-release project. The hybrids lived in natural groups in large fenced areas, but received regular veterinary care and human support when needed. It wasn't complete wilderness, but it allowed them to express their natural instincts. "And could I visit him?" asked Sarah, her voice barely able to hide the pain of the possible separation. "Not just visit. I need a qualified veterinarian to work on the project. If you were willing to move to the region, you could directly monitor his development." The proposal was tempting, but it would mean abandoning her life in Aspen, her clinic, her other patients. It was a decision that would change everything. Can I think about it?" "Of course. But remember, you only have 1 week before the final deadline with the authorities. If you decide to hand over the hybrid to the New York Zoo, he will spend the rest of his life in a small cage, alone, never able to express his natural instincts." The return trip was silent and painful. Sarah drove while the hybrid slept in the back seat, apparently more relaxed than he had been in weeks. It was as if just a few hours in a more natural environment had relieved some of the stress he constantly carried. At home, Sarah spent the whole night looking at the hybrid and reflecting on Daniel's words. For the first time, she tried to put herself in the animal's place. What would it be like to live constrained by natural instincts, always knowing something was missing, but unable to express that need? The answer came unexpectedly the next morning. Sarah woke up to noises coming from the living room and found the hybrid standing near the front door, clearly agitated. When she opened the door to see what was happening, he dashed out toward the woods at the back of her property. "No! Come back here!" she shouted, running after him in her pajamas and slippers. But the hybrid wasn't running away from her. He was running towards something. When Sarah finally caught up to him, he was standing in a small clearing, watching 3 other hybrids who apparently lived wild in the area. The encounter lasted only a few minutes before the wild hybrids moved away, but it was long enough for Sarah to see something she had never seen before. Her hybrid completely in his element, communicating with others of his kind through body language she didn't even know existed. When she finally managed to bring him back home, Sarah knew she had received the answer she was looking for. The hybrid didn't belong in her living room. He belonged in that clearing, with those other hybrids, in that life she could never provide no matter how much she loved him. That afternoon, Sarah called Daniel Peterson. "Daniel, it's Sarah. I accept your proposal, both for the hybrid and for the job. Are you sure? It's a big decision. I am. I saw this morning where he truly belongs. And if I can be near him while he lives the life he should have lived all along, it's more than I could ask for. The preparations for the move took the entire remaining week. Sarah needed to arrange the transfer of her patients to other veterinarians in the area, sell some furniture, and prepare her house for renting. Each preparation was painful, but it also brought a growing sense of relief. The hybrid seemed to sense the change in the environment. He became more alert, as if he knew something important was happening. On their last night at home, Sarah sat on the floor beside him and finally said out loud what she was feeling. "I'm sorry it took me so long to understand. You tried to show me from the beginning that you were different, that you needed more than I could offer here. But I was so attached to the idea of saving you that I forgot to ask what you really wanted." The hybrid approached and rested his head in her lap, just as he had done on the first night. But this time Sarah felt it was a farewell to their old relationship, not a desperate attachment. The move to the Blue Ridge Mountains happened on a sunny August morning. Daniel had provided a small but comfortable house on the property for Sarah, allowing her to stay close to the project while maintaining her independence. The moment of transitioning the hybrid to the group was emotionally devastating and yet wonderful. Sarah walked him to the gate of the enclosure and released him. He hesitated for a moment, looking at her, then ran toward the other hybrids who were waiting curiously. "It's normal to feel like you're betraying him," Daniel said, standing beside Sarah as they watched the hybrid explore his new environment. "That's exactly how I feel," admitted Sarah, wiping tears she couldn't hold back. "But look at him. Really look." Sarah looked and saw something extraordinary. For the first time since she found him, the hybrid seemed completely relaxed. His movements were natural, his posture confident, and when one of the other hybrids approached him, he responded with body language she had never seen before. "He's home," whispered Sarah. "Exactly. And you brought him home. That's not betrayal. It's love." The first days at her new job were a revelation for Sarah. Working with hybrids in a semi-wild environment was completely different from her previous experience. Each animal had a unique personality, a story of abandonment or rescue, and specific needs that had to be balanced with their wild instincts. But most importantly was being able to witness the transformation of her hybrid. Within 2 weeks, he had fully integrated into the group and taken on a natural leadership role. His movements were more confident, his posture prouder, and his golden eyes shone with a satisfaction Sarah had never seen before. "He's always been an alpha," Daniel observed during one of the weekly evaluations. "Probably why he suffered so much in a domestic environment. Alpha wolves need to lead, protect, make decisions. In a home, that turns into anxiety and destructive behavior." Sarah nodded, watching through the fence as her former companion organized the group's routine, deciding when to hunt, when to rest, when to investigate something new. He was a natural leader she had inadvertently tried to turn into a pet. The first winter in the Blue Ridge Mountains was harsh, but it also brought a sense of completeness Sarah hadn't expected. Her veterinary skills were essential to keeping the group of hybrids healthy, and she developed specialized techniques for working with animals that were neither completely wild nor completely domesticated. More importantly, her relationship with the hybrid evolved into something much richer than it had been before. When she entered the enclosure for exams or treatments, he recognized her immediately and approached with respect and affection, but without the anxious dependence that characterized his previous life. It was a connection based on mutual trust rather than need. "Look at this," Daniel said one morning, pointing to the hybrid who had brought a small injury for Sarah to examine, even though it wasn't serious. "What do you mean?" "He's teaching the group to trust you. See how the others approach when you're examining him. He's creating a bridge between human care and wildlife." Sarah watched and realized Daniel was right. The other hybrids, who initially kept a respectful distance when she entered the enclosure, now approached curiously, allowing her to examine them when necessary. Her hybrid had become a kind of ambassador, teaching the group that not all humans were threats. 6 months after the move, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was from Mrs. Dorothy, her former neighbor in Aspen. "Sarah, dear, I hope you don't mind that I got your number from your mother." "Of course not, Mrs. Dorothy. How is everything there?" "That's what I wanted to talk about. Another abandoned puppy showed up behind your old clinic. The new owners don't know what to do, and everyone's saying you'd know how to take better care of him." Sarah felt her heart race. "Another hybrid?" "It seems so. He has the same little golden eyes yours had." After the conversation, Sarah became thoughtful. She had found her professional purpose working with hybrids, but perhaps there was a way to expand the project to help other animals in similar situations. She talked to Daniel about the possibility of picking up the puppy and maybe developing a broader rescue program. The idea excited them, and 2 weeks later they were back in Aspen. The puppy was in even worse condition than her hybrid had been the previous year. But when Sarah picked him up and looked into those familiar golden eyes, she immediately knew she had found not just another animal to save, but a life mission. "Let's take you to meet your new family," she said to the puppy, thinking of the group of hybrids waiting for him in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The return trip was different from the first time. Sarah was no longer trying to force a wild animal to adapt to her life, but rather preparing to adapt her life to the animal's needs. It was a completely different perspective, and much healthier for everyone involved. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing, the integration of the second hybrid went much more smoothly than Sarah had expected. Her first hybrid, now clearly the pack leader, immediately adopted the newcomer, teaching him the rules of the pack and introducing him to the other members. It was like watching a real-time animal sociology class. Daniel was impressed by how easily the integration happened. Usually, rescued hybrids take months to fully adapt, but your alpha is making it easier for the little one. Sarah watched with pride as her former companion had transformed into a patient teacher, showing the young one where to find water, how to respond to human caretakers' commands, and most importantly, how to balance wild instincts with the need to live in a group. The arrival of the second hybrid also brought an unexpected discovery. During a detailed veterinary examination, Daniel noticed that both animals had microscopic identification marks indicating a common origin. Apparently, they were part of a litter that had been separated at a very young age. "They're siblings," Daniel announced after confirming the genetic analysis. "They were probably sold illegally and ended up abandoned when the buyers realized they weren't ordinary dogs." The revelation explained the immediate connection between the two hybrids and also opened up an investigation into other possible siblings who might be in similar situations. Sarah felt energized by the possibility of reuniting the original family, even if belatedly. Through a network of veterinary contacts in the region, Sarah and Daniel began investigating cases of abandoned or problematic animals that could be unidentified hybrids. Within 3 months, they had located 2 other suspicious cases, one in Asheville and another in Boulder. Each rescue brought new challenges. The Asheville hybrid had developed aggression due to mistreatment, requiring a slow and careful psychological rehabilitation process. The one from Boulder was so traumatized that it wouldn't allow human approach, needing months of gradual conditioning. But seeing the gradual reunion of the siblings was one of the most rewarding experiences of Sarah's professional life. When the last hybrid finally joined the group, there was a natural celebration among the animals that even moved Daniel. "In 20 years of working with wildlife, I've never seen anything like it," he admitted. "Watching the 4 siblings running together for the first time since they were pups." The success of the Hybrid Family Reunification Project caught the attention of environmental authorities, universities, and even international conservation organizations. The assisted semi-freedom model, developed by Daniel and refined with Sarah's veterinary experience, was becoming a national benchmark. Sarah had never imagined that her initial stubbornness in not handing over the first hybrid would result in the creation of such a significant project. She had transformed her personal need to protect an animal into a larger mission to help an entire hybrid species that had no defined place in society. 2 years after moving to the Blue Ridge Mountains, Sarah received an unexpected proposal. The federal government wanted to turn the project into an official research unit, offering substantial funding and scientific recognition in exchange for detailed documentation of the methods used. "It's a unique opportunity," Daniel said during the meeting where they discussed the proposal. "We could expand to handle cases from across the country, develop official protocols, train other professionals." Sarah was torn. On one hand, formalization would bring resources and reach they could never achieve alone. On the other, she feared that bureaucratization could compromise the personalized approach that had made the project so successful. "What if we accept but maintain autonomy over treatment methods?" she suggested. "We can try to negotiate these terms, but you need to be prepared to become a public figure. They'll want you lecturing at universities, writing scientific articles, attending conferences." The prospect of leaving direct work with the hybrids to become an academic didn't excite Sarah. Her satisfaction came from daily contact with the animals, from seeing their gradual transformations, from actively participating in their lives. During a nighttime walk through the property while reflecting on the decision, Sarah passed by the hybrid enclosure and stopped to observe them. The group had grown to 8 members, all rescued and rehabilitated through the project. Her first hybrid remained the natural leader, but now shared responsibilities with other alphas who had emerged. Watching the group's harmony, Sarah realized that perhaps it was time to expand the project's reach, even if that meant less individual time with each animal. There were hundreds of other hybrids in similar situations scattered across the country, and she had developed knowledge that could save them. "All right, Daniel, let's accept the proposal. But with 2 conditions: I maintain at least 3 days per week of direct work here, and any new protocol needs to be tested first with our group before being applied elsewhere." The transition to the formalized project brought significant changes. Sarah had to learn to handle bureaucratic reports, presentations for authorities, and constant visits from researchers and students. Sometimes she missed the simplicity of the early months, when it was just her, Daniel, and the hybrids. But there were also rewarding aspects to the new phase. Seeing young veterinarians arrive excited to learn the techniques developed in the project reminded Sarah of her own journey. Every trained professional represented dozens of hybrids that could be saved in the future. The first major test of the expanded program came when they received a distress call from Colorado. An entire family of hybrids had been abandoned on a farm, and local authorities didn't know how to proceed. It was exactly the kind of situation the project had been created to solve. Sarah led the rescue team, applying for the first time in the field all the protocols they had developed during the previous 2 years. The operation was complex, involving careful capture, specialized transportation, and gradual integration of traumatized animals. But when she saw the hybrid family finally settle in the sanctuary, running free for the first time in months, Sarah knew she had made the right decision in accepting the project's expansion. Her first hybrid had been the catalyst for saving dozens of others. During a 3-year project evaluation, Sarah came across statistics that surprised her. They had rescued 57 hybrids, developed protocols adopted by 12 other institutions, and trained 43 specialized professionals. The impact had been much greater than she ever imagined possible, but the statistic that touched her most was discovering that the survival and adaptation rate of hybrids in the project was 96%, significantly higher than traditional zoo methods. This scientifically validated what she had always felt intuitively, that true love sometimes means creating space for the loved one to be who they truly are. On an autumn afternoon, 5 years after finding the first pup behind her clinic, Sarah sat on the porch of her home in the Blue Ridge Mountains and reflected on the extraordinary journey her life had taken. Through the window, she could see the enclosure where her first hybrid lived happily with his chosen family. He had become a father twice, and his lineage was contributing to strengthening the genetic pool of hybrids in captivity. But more than that, he had become a teacher to other rescued hybrids, always the first to welcome new members and help them adapt. Sarah picked up her phone and called her mother in Aspen. "Mom, remember when you said I was throwing my life away because of an animal?" "Yes, I do, dear. And I still think you're too stubborn for your own good." Well, that stubbornness helped save over 50 animals and created a project that's being copied worldwide. "All right, Sarah. Maybe sometimes your stubbornness is a good thing, admitted Mrs. Patricia with a laugh. But are you truly happy? Don't you regret leaving your normal life? Sarah looked out the window again, watching the hybrid that had changed everything playing with his pups. Mom, I've never been happier in my life. After hanging up, Sarah walked to the enclosure for the routine evening check. The hybrid approached the fence and greeted her with the same affectionate respect as always. For a moment, they looked at each other through the mesh, and Sarah felt the deep connection that had motivated her entire journey. "Thank you," she whispered, "for teaching me that true love is about freedom, not possession." As she was turning away to return home, Sarah heard the hybrid howl softly, a sound that echoed through the mountains and was answered by other wild wolves in the distance. It was a sound of belonging, of finally being home, of having found one's place in the world. Sarah smiled, knowing she had made the right decisions, even when they were the hardest. Sometimes love meant holding on tight, but other times it meant knowing when to let go. And in her case and the hybrids, letting go had allowed both to find better versions of themselves. That night, for the first time in years, Sarah slept without any worries or regrets. She had found her purpose, saved a life, created a project that would save many others, and most importantly, learned that true love sometimes comes disguised as impossible decisions that, in the end, turn out to be the only possible ones. 3 years later, the project had expanded to handle international cases, and Sarah was preparing for her first lecture in Europe on hybrid rehabilitation. Before traveling, she made her final check at the enclosure, as she always did before any trip. The hybrid, now a respected patriarch of a large family, approached the fence with his usual grace, but this time he brought one of his pups with him, introducing it to Sarah for the first time. "So you want me to meet the new generation," said Sarah, moved to see how the pup watched her with curiosity and no fear. It was a symbolic passing of the torch. The hybrid was showing that the next generation could grow up without trauma, without abandonment, without needing to be rescued. They would be born free in a family, in the right environment from the start. Sarah reached her hand through the fence, and the pup approached cautiously but confidently. It was the circle closing in the most perfect way possible. From abandonment to rescue, from rescue to rehabilitation, from rehabilitation to a new generation that would be born free. During the flight to Europe, Sarah finalized the text for the lecture she would give at the international conference. It wasn't just about rehabilitation techniques, but about the philosophy behind the work, that true animal care means respecting the nature of each species instead of trying to change it. When the plane took off from New York, Sarah looked out the window toward the Blue Ridge Mountains, where she knew her hybrids were running free under the stars. It was a vision that would stay with her always, reminding her that sometimes the best stories begin with decisions that seem impossible at the time. 7 years after finding a freezing pup behind her clinic, Sarah had become a world authority on hybrid rehabilitation. But more importantly, she had learned that true love sometimes requires us to make choices that break our heart to heal that of someone we love. And when the hybrid, now a grandfather, howled on the cold mountain nights, Sarah knew it was a sound of gratitude, echoing through the mountains like a song of freedom won through love that knew when to let go. The project had grown beyond any expectation, but her heart remained that first moment of connection between a stubborn veterinarian and an abandoned pup, who together discovered that true love sometimes means making space for those we love to be truly free. And in the Blue Ridge Mountains, under a starry sky, a family of hybrids ran free for the first time in generations, living the life they had always deserved, protected by a woman who learned that sometimes saving someone means accepting that they no longer need to be saved. Years later, when veterinary students visited the project and asked Sarah what had been the hardest moment of the entire journey, she always answered the same thing: "The day I realized I had to choose between what I wanted and what he needed. It was the most painful day of my life, but also the day I learned what it truly means to love." And when they asked what had been the most rewarding moment, she smiled and pointed to the enclosure, where generations of hybrids were born and grew up free, knowing from day one that they were loved exactly as they were, without needing to change or adapt to deserve care. Seeing the first litter born here was when I knew we had succeeded. We didn't just save the hybrids we rescued, but we created a future where others will never need to be rescued, Sarah would say, watching the pups playing under the protective gaze of their parents. The story of the project had spread internationally, inspiring similar initiatives in other countries. Sarah received constant invitations for consultations and lectures, but she never stayed away from the Blue Ridge Mountains for more than a few weeks. Her true home remained beside the hybrids that had changed her life. In an interview for an international documentary about animal conservation, the interviewer asked Sarah if she regretted abandoning her traditional veterinary career to dedicate herself exclusively to the hybrids. "I didn't abandon veterinary medicine," Sarah replied, looking through the window of the makeshift studio on the property. "I transformed it into something greater than I ever imagined it could be. Every hybrid we save teaches me something new about resilience, about adaptation, about the capacity for healing when we offer the right environment." When the documentary aired 2 years later, Sarah watched it in her living room with Daniel and some of the students who were now permanent members of the team. Seeing her story told to the world was exciting, but the moment that touched her most was a scene showing her first hybrid teaching a newly arrived pup to trust humans. "He became our best ambassador," Daniel commented during the screening. "Every new hybrid that arrives learns from him that it's possible to maintain wild nature and still trust human care when needed." Sarah agreed, remembering how she had fought so hard to domesticate that same animal years ago. The irony wasn't lost on her. By allowing him to be completely wild, she had created the perfect bridge between the human world and the natural world. The project now served cases from across the South American continent, and Sarah had become a reference not only in hybrid rehabilitation, but in animal welfare more broadly. Her semi-assisted freedom techniques were being adapted for other species in similar situations. But despite all the professional recognition, what made Sarah most proud was something very simple. The certainty that she had made the right choice on that difficult night years ago, when she decided that true love sometimes means letting go. In her office on the property, Sarah kept a framed photo from that first morning when she found the cub behind the clinic. It was a photo she had taken a few days later, showing the small hybrid sleeping in her living room. Sometimes she looked at the photo and could hardly believe the journey they had taken together. "Who would have thought, right?" she said one morning to the photo before heading out for her morning care routine. An abandoned cub would change so much. But when she left the house and saw the landscape of the mountains dotted with the enclosures, where dozens of hybrids lived free and happy, Sarah knew it wasn't just the cub that had changed everything. It had been her ability to choose what was right instead of what was easy, to choose true love instead of selfish possession. And when the sun rose over the Blue Ridge Mountains, illuminating a family of hybrids running free in their homeland, Sarah knew that some stories have no end because they transform into new beginnings every day. Years later, when young veterinarians arrived at the project full of ideas about how to improve hybrid treatment, Sarah always took them first to meet her first rescue. Now an elderly and wise patriarch, he had become the ultimate test for any new approach. If he didn't approve, it wasn't implemented. "He was my teacher before he was my patient," Sarah explained to the new professionals. "He taught me that there is no greater love than completely respecting the nature of those we love, even when that means accepting that we are different." And when the old hybrid approached the new faces with his characteristic dignity, allowing them to touch him but always maintaining his wild majesty, Sarah knew that the lesson was being passed on to a new generation of caregivers. The project's legacy had become greater than Sarah ever imagined possible, but her heart remained in the place where it all began, in that simple and profound connection between a woman and an animal who met at the right moment in their lives and taught each other what it truly means to love without trying to possess. And in the Blue Ridge Mountains, where the wind carried the howls of free hybrids across the mountains, the story continued to be written every day, a permanent lesson that sometimes the best decisions of our lives are the ones that hurt the most at the moment they are made. End of story. And so, dear listener, what did you think of this story of true love between Sarah and the hybrid? Do you agree that she made the right decision by allowing him to live free? Tell us in the comments here which part moved you the most and where you're following us from. And if this story touched your heart in some special way, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end.